The late afternoon sun struggled through the grimy warehouse skylights, painting long, dusty beams in the air. She wove her way through a maze of other people's forgotten things. Her name was Elena, and she was tired. A nursing student's life was a blur of textbooks, clinical rotations, and a budget that was always stretched too thin. Today's mission was simple. Find a decent reading chair that didn't cost a fortune. The warehouse was a kingdom of cast-offs. Towers of mismatched dishes teetered precariously. A forest of floor lamps stood unlit, their shades dented. The air smelled of old paper, damp wood, and a faint, sweet trace of mothballs. She moved past a rack of fur coats that seemed to sigh, past a box of porcelain dolls with eyes that followed you just a little too creepily. It was in the very back corner, where the fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered with a tired, irritable energy, that she saw the shape. It was mostly hidden under a pile of faded, floral print quilts and a tangle of brass table lamps. But the lines were unmistakable: the straight back, the sloping front, the three petals peeking out just barely from the shadows. A piano. Elena wasn't a musical person. Her world was built of practical things: anatomy charts, medication schedules, the precise, life-sustaining rhythm of a heartbeat on a monitor. Music was something that played in the background at coffee shops, or from her roommate's phone. It was decoration, not a language she spoke, yet something made her stop. She set down her purse and reached out, not for the keys, but for the corner of the top quilt. It came away in a cloud of dust that danced in the slanted light. She tugged gently, and another quilt slid to the concrete floor with a soft *WHUMP*, and there it was. It was an upright piano, the kind that might have once stood proudly in a family parlor. Its walnut veneer was beautiful in places, a deep, warm honey color, but it was scarred. Long, white scratches ran down its side, like memories of a careless move. Several of the ivory key covers were missing, and the ones that remained were not white, but a sad, yellowish cream, like old teeth. One of the front legs was slightly chipped. A forlorn, handwritten price tag was stuck to the music stand with brittle, yellowed tape. It just said, $50 oboe. On an impulse she didn't quite understand, she lifted the fall, bore the cover over the keys. It groaned in protest, a sound of stiff hinges and long disuse. The keys lay before her, a landscape of ebony and aged ivory. She reached out a finger, the one she used to check pulses, and pressed down on middle C. It didn't sound like she expected. From such a sad-looking thing, she thought the note would be a dull, tinny thunk asterisk. Instead, a sound emerged. It was muted, yes, covered in sonic dust, but it was a note, a real, proper, musical note that hung in the dusty air for a second before fading away. It had a warmth to it, a roundness. It was less a sound and more a feeling in her chest. Thinking of taking up a new hobby? The voice made her jump. An elderly man, the store owner she presumed, had appeared as quietly as a ghost. He had a kind, worn face and eyes that looked like they'd seen a million stories come and go through his doors. "Oh, no," Elena said quickly, wiping her dusty finger on her jeans. "I'm just looking for a chair, actually. I'm a student. I don't know the first thing about pianos." The man nodded, shuffling closer. He didn't look at her. He looked at the piano. His gaze was soft, familiar. "This old girl's been here a long time," he said, almost to himself. "Came in years ago from an estate sale. No one wanted her. Too big, too damaged, not shiny." He ran a gentle, gnarled hand over the scratched wood. "People want things that look new, even if they're empty inside. This one's the opposite." Elena listened, a strange feeling settling in her stomach. It was the feeling she got sometimes with very sick patients. A sense of a life humming just under the surface. Quiet but persistent. $50 is a lot for a student, she said, her practical side kicking in. "And I live in a walk-up. Second floor. Make me an offer," the man said, his eyes twinkling. "Tell you what, you clearly see her. Not many do. They see a broken piece of furniture. You heard her. I just pressed one key," Elena protested. But her protest was weak. "It's enough," the man said. He looked at the piano, then back at her. "Sometimes, things wait for the right person. Sounds silly, I know. In my business, you get a feel for it." She's been patient. Elena looked at the piano. She thought of her bare, boxy apartment, all function and no soul. She thought of the relentless pressure of her studies, the constant need to be logical, precise, unemotional. She thought of $50, which was half her grocery budget for the week. It was an insane idea. 20? she heard herself say, the word out before her brain could stop it. The old man threw his head back and laughed, a sound like rustling pages. You drive a hard bargain. Tell you what, you get it out of here. It's yours for 20, but you have to promise me something. What? Promise you'll play it. Just once in a while. Let it make a sound. A thing like this. It's not meant for silence, and that was how, an hour later, Elena found herself directing her bewildered friend from class, who had a pickup truck, into the loading alley. With a great deal of grunting, sliding, and the use of a rickety old dolly, they managed to get the colossal, unwieldy weight of the piano into the truck bed. It seemed to grow heavier with every step. The old man waved from the doorway, a small, satisfied smile on his face. Getting it up the 2 flights of narrow stairs to her apartment was an ordeal of epic proportions. It involved strategic tilting, desperate prayers to the gods of rental security deposits, and a lot of whispered curses. At one point, they were stuck on the landing, the piano leaning at a terrifying angle, and Elena was sure it would all end in a splintered disaster. But finally, with one last heave, they pushed it over the threshold and into her living room. It sat there, massive and alien, against the wall where she'd imagined a small bookshelf would go. It dominated the space. It seemed to suck all the light and sound into itself. Her friend left, shaking his head and rubbing his sore back. Leaving Elena alone with her colossal purchase, the apartment was quiet. The evening light was fading, turning the room blue. She walked over to the piano and simply stared at it. In the clean, plain light of her own home, it looked even more battered, more out of place. The chips and scratches were more obvious. The missing keys were like gaps in a smile. A faint smell of old wood and forgotten room still clung to it, mixing with the scent of her lemon-scented cleaner. What had she done? This wasn't a chair. This was a monument to a terrible, impulsive decision. She was a science-based, logic-driven person. She dealt in facts, in things that could be measured and proven. This was a sentimental lump of junk. Feeling a flush of regret, she opened the fallboard again. This time, the groan of the hinges was a familiar complaint. She let her fingers hover over the keys. She didn't press down. She just looked at the patterns they made, the alternating blacks and whites. It was a code she couldn't crack, a language she was illiterate in. With a sigh, she took the soft cloth she used for dusting and began to wipe the surface. The wood, under the grime, had a beautiful grain. She polished the good leg. She brushed dust from the quiet petals. It wasn't playing it, but it was caring for it. It was a start. That night, as she tried to study at her desk, her eyes kept drifting to the dark shape in the corner. It was just a piece of furniture, she told herself. A bulky, inconvenient, $20 piece of furniture. But in the silent darkness, it felt like more. It felt like a question she had brought into her home. A question she had no idea how to answer. And as she finally turned off her lamp and went to bed, the last thing she saw before closing her eyes was the faint outline of the piano, waiting. The piano became a piece of the apartment's landscape. For the first week, it was a novelty. Her roommate would plink a few keys in passing, declaring it kind of sad, but cool. Friends who came over asked the story, and she'd tell them about the warehouse and the old man, and they'd nod and say it had good character. But then life, with its relentless pace, swept back in. Textbooks piled up on the coffee table, empty coffee mugs gathered on any available surface, and the piano settled into its role as the world's heaviest, most impractical shelf. A stack of mail found a home on its closed lid. A sweatshirt was draped over its bench, for her, the nursing student whose name was Elena. It was a symbol of a strange, impulsive moment she didn't fully understand. It stood there in the corner of her vision during late-night study sessions, a silent, judgmental presence. She'd catch sight of it while memorizing the bones of the hand or the side effects of a medication, and a little pang of guilt would hit her. She'd promised the old man she'd play it. But what did that even mean? Play asterisk what asterisk? 2 weeks after its arrival, a Thursday night brought a brutal rainstorm. It was the kind that hammered against the windows and made the world outside feel small and far away. Her roommate was out of town. The usual city sounds were swallowed by the steady drumming on the roof. Elena had just finished a long chapter on cardiovascular physiology. Her eyes were tired. Her brain felt stuffed full of facts and figures, and a deep, quiet loneliness had seeped in around the edges. She made tea and stood by the window, watching the rain streak the glass. The quiet of the apartment felt heavy, not peaceful. Her gaze drifted to the piano. In the dim lamplight, The scratches seemed less like flaws and more like marks of a life lived. The silent, yellowed keys were just waiting. "Okay," she said to the empty room, her voice sounding too loud. "Just to clean it properly." She got the soft cloth and a small bottle of gentle wood cleaner. She moved the mail and folded the sweatshirt. She started carefully wiping the dusty fallboard, the music stand, the elegant curves of its sides. The wood began to shine faintly, the rich grain coming to life under her touch. It felt like tending to a patient, in a way methodical, attentive. Finally, she lifted the heavy lid over the keys. The familiar groan of the hinges was a sound she was starting to know. The keys lay there, exposed. She sprayed a little cleaner on the cloth and began to wipe each key, top and front. Black and white. The clean ivory, where it was still whole, glowed softly. The ebony keys felt smooth and cool. As she was polishing a cluster of keys in the middle, her cloth slipped. Her finger, bare, pressed directly down on a white key. It was the one right in the center. *C*. The note filled the apartment. It was clearer now, without a layer of dust in the way. It wasn't a loud sound, but it was profoundly present. It was a deep, round, solid note that seemed to vibrate in the air long after she lifted her finger. It didn't fade so much as it dissolved into the quiet, leaving a different kind of silence behind. Hesitantly, almost against her will, she let her finger drift to the white key next to it. *D*. A different note, brighter. Then she went back to the first one. *C*. Again. Without thinking, her other hand came up. Her left index finger found a lower white key, a few steps down. *F*. She didn't know the names of the notes. She didn't know what she was doing, but her fingers, seemingly of their own accord, pressed a sequence. *C*. With the right hand, *F*. With the left, together. Then *E*, then *F* again in a different pattern. It was a simple, slow, sad little progression of 3 chords. It sounded like the rain outside. It sounded like the tired feeling in her bones, a shiver, electric and cold, shot straight up her spine. Her hands froze, hovering just above the keys. Her heart was suddenly pounding in her ears, louder than the rain. What was that? She hadn't chosen those notes. She had never, in her entire life, sat at a piano. Music class in school had been about recorders and theory sheets, which she'd hated. This was different. This was in her hands, a physical memory, but a memory of something she had never learned. Slowly, carefully, as if the keys might be hot, she placed her fingers back in the same starting position. She pressed down. The same 3-note pattern came out. It was unmistakable. It was a real, if simple, piece of music, and her fingers knew the tiny movements, the slight stretch, the gentle release. Her breath caught. This was impossible. It had to be a fluke, a weird muscle memory from some childhood toy piano she'd long forgotten. She moved her right hand, searching blindly. Her thumb found a black key. She pressed it along with the white key next to it. A dissonant, bluesy sound rang out. It was ugly and beautiful at the same time. Her left hand mirrored the movement, finding a lower, matching pair. Then, something unlocked. It wasn't a song she knew. It was a feeling of deep, wordless longing that lived in the pit of her stomach. Her right hand began to move faster, picking out a wandering, melancholy melody. Her left hand settled into a slow, rocking rhythm, a heartbeat of low notes. She wasn't playing a song. She was playing *. The notes were sad, but playing them felt like relief, like letting out a breath she'd been holding for 20 years. She lost track of time. The storm raged outside, but in the apartment, there was only the sound she was pulling from the old piano. It wasn't perfect. She hit wrong notes, clusters that clashed, but the feeling was there, flowing through her fingertips. She played until the muscles in her forearms ached with a new kind of fatigue. Abruptly, she stopped. The last note hung, then faded into the sudden, deafening quiet. The only sound was the rain. She stared at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. They were trembling slightly. Her eyes stung. A wild, crazy thought burst into her head. This is what it's for. This is why it was waiting. Then, the logical part of her brain, the nursing student who trusted science and reason, slammed down like a gate. This was ridiculous. She was overtired, stressed from exams, susceptible to suggestion. The old man's talk about the piano waiting had planted a seed in her mind, and her subconscious was playing a trick on her. That had to be it. There was no other explanation that made sense. She stood up so quickly the piano bench scraped loudly on the floor. The sound was harsh, a shock back to reality. She closed the fallboard over the keys with a definitive asterisk thump asterisk, sealing the strange magic inside. She turned her back on it. "You're losing it," she muttered to herself, carrying her tea mug to the sink. She washed it meticulously, focusing on the tangible feel of the ceramic, the warm water. She wiped the counter. She organized her textbooks into a neat stack. She did normal things, but that night, lying in bed in the dark, she couldn't quiet her mind. The phantom feeling of the smooth, cool keys was still under her fingertips. The sound of that simple, sad little progression echoed in her ears, mixing with the sound of the rain. It had felt more real, more asterisk asterisk, than anything she'd done in weeks. It wasn't memorization. It wasn't performance. It was expression, raw and unplanned, and it terrified her. What if it was real? What if this was some hidden part of herself, broken and out of tune like the piano, that was suddenly waking up? The thought was more frightening than any exam. It was a door swinging open in a dark room, and she wasn't sure she wanted to see what was on the other side. She rolled over, pulling the blanket tight. The last thing she saw before squeezing her eyes shut was the dark, silent outline of the piano against the wall. It didn't look like furniture anymore. It looked like a question, and now it was a question that had an answer. She just had no idea what the answer meant. The days after the storm were filled with a strange kind of quiet. Elena went through her routines, classes, clinicals, studying at the library, but her mind kept drifting back to the corner of her living room. The piano was no longer just a piece of furniture. It had become a presence, a silent, waiting presence that seemed to hum with a potential she was desperately trying to ignore. She avoided it. She would come home and deliberately not look at it, busying herself with tasks that kept her back turned. She cooked elaborate meals she didn't have time for. She reorganized her closet. But at night, in the deep quiet after midnight, the avoidance became a physical ache. It was like knowing there was a letter addressed to you, sealed, on the table, and refusing to open it. Finally, on a Friday night, her resistance crumbled. Her roommate was out at a concert. The apartment was hers alone. She stood in the middle of the room, her heart doing a nervous tap dance against her ribs. This was silly, she told herself. It was just a thing, a heavy, wooden thing with wires inside. She walked over, sat down, and lifted the fallboard. The groan of the hinges was now a familiar, almost welcoming sound. She didn't try to clean the keys this time. She just placed her hands on them, cool and smooth. She took a deep breath and let her fingers find that first simple three-note pattern from the rainy night. It came easier this time. The notes flowed, and then, as before, they began to wander. Her right hand started tracing a melody that felt older than she was, something with a classical shape, full of rises and falls that felt like a story without words. It wasn't perfect. Her timing was clumsy, and sometimes her left hand fumbled, hitting to notes that crashed together with an unpleasant jangle. But in between the mistakes, there were moments of pure, shocking clarity. A run of notes so fast and light her fingers seemed to blur. A deep, resonant chord that made the whole instrument vibrate with feeling. She didn't understand it. She was following a map drawn on her nerves, not in her mind. After a while, a practical idea struck her. She got her phone, set it on the music stand, and hit record. She needed to hear this from the outside, to prove to herself it was real and not some stress-induced dream. She played for 20 minutes. When she stopped, her shoulders were tight, but her mind was clearer than it had been in weeks. She picked up the phone, saved the recording, and plugged in her headphones with trembling hands. What she heard made her blood run cold, then hot. It was her. It was the sound of the old piano, a little tinny in places, a little muffled. But the music was real asterisk. It wasn't just random plinking. It had structure, emotion, a beginning and an end she hadn't consciously planned. There were entire sections that sounded like a real song, something you might hear in the background of a sad, old movie. And then there were parts that were just wild, improvisational, feeling stormy and loud, then soft as a whisper. The gap between what she knew, a person with zero training, and what she was hearing was impossible to bridge. A dizzying wave of fear washed over her. This wasn't a fun party trick. This felt like discovering a secret room inside yourself that you never built. She needed to talk to someone. But who? Her friends would just say it was cool, amazing. They wouldn't get the terror of it. Her roommate would be supportive but wouldn't understand the deep, unsettling weirdness. There was only one person who had known her from the beginning, who held the stories of her family like old photographs. It was Sunday afternoon, the time she always called her grandmother. She dialed the number, her usual cheerful greeting sticking in her throat. "Hi, Abuela," she said, her voice thinner than she intended. "Mija, you sound tired. Are you eating? You're studying too hard." Her grandmother's voice, warm and laced with a faint Spanish accent, was a comfort and a pressure all at once. "I'm eating, I promise. I'm okay." Elena hesitated, twisting the phone cord around her finger. "Abuela, I have to ask you something weird. Weird is good. Keeps life interesting." "What is it?" Elena took a shaky breath. "When I was little, did I ever take piano lessons? Like, maybe you took me for a little while and I hated it and we all just forgot?" There was a silence on the other end of the line. It wasn't a confused silence. It was a heavy, loaded one. The kind of silence that comes before a truth that's been sitting in the dark for a long time. "Why are you asking this, Elena?" Her grandmother's voice was careful, soft. I bought a piano. An old, beat-up one from a thrift store. And I can play it. I don't know how, but I can. I just sat down and my hands knew what to do. And it's not just chopsticks, Abuela. It's real music. It's like it was already in me." The words tumbled out in a rushed, frightened whisper. Another long pause. Elena could hear her grandmother's quiet breathing. She could picture her in her sunny kitchen, the one with the yellow curtains, her face settling into the lines of an old memory. "Elena, mi corazón," her grandmother began, her voice thick with an emotion Elena couldn't name. "You never took a lesson." "Not one." "Then how?" "Listen to me," her grandmother interrupted, her tone gentle but firm. "Your mother, your real mother, she could play." The world seemed to tilt. Elena knew she was adopted. Her grandmother, her father's mother, had raised her after a car accident took her dad when she was a baby. Her mother was a story that was always vague. A shadowy figure said to have been unwell and not able to stay. It was a closed subject. A door everyone had agreed was best left shut. "What do you mean?" Elena whispered. Her name was Isabel. She was like a lightning storm in a human body. So bright it hurt to look at her sometimes, and so dark you couldn't find her in her own shadows. Her grandmother's words were painted with a love that had never faded, and a deep, old sadness. But when she played, Elena, when she played, it was like the angels stopped to listen. She could make a piano laugh or cry. She played in big concert halls when she was just a teenager. It was all anyone thought she would ever do. Elena's grip on the phone was so tight her knuckles were white. She couldn't speak. "Then she met your father. It was fast. And then she was pregnant with you. She was so happy, but her mind, it was a fragile thing. The doctors said it was a sickness, a deep depression that came after you were born. She tried to stay. She loved you so much it scared her. But she couldn't. She couldn't get out of the dark. She left when you were just 3 months old. We got a call, a year later, that she was gone. A single, hot tear traced a path down Elena's cheek. She hadn't known. She'd pictured a woman who didn't want her. Not a woman caught in a storm she couldn't escape. The music, her grandmother continued, wiping her own eyes. Elena could hear it in her voice. It was the one place she was truly whole. She said it was the only language that made sense to her. "We packed all of it away, the records, the programs, the sheet music. We thought it was part of the pain. We wanted you to have a quiet, steady life. We never wanted this ghost to trouble you." Elena looked across the room at the old, scarred piano. It wasn't a ghost. It was a key to a room inside her that her mother had built. "It's not troubling me, Abuela," she said, her voice choked but clear. "It feels like finding a piece of her, a piece of me I didn't know was missing." "Oh, Mija," her grandmother wept softly. "I am so sorry we never told you. It was too hard for your grandfather. And then, as you grew, you were so practical, so smart in your science books. You never asked for a piano. It seemed like a part of a story that had ended." "It didn't end," Elena said, a strange certainty solidifying in her chest. The fear was still there, but it was now mixed with something else, a profound, aching connection. It was just waiting. They talked for a long time after that. About Isabel's laugh, which was apparently too loud for polite rooms. About the way she would forget to eat when she was practicing. About the single photo her grandmother still had, tucked in a Bible, of a young woman with wild, dark hair and intense eyes, sitting proudly at a grand piano. When Elena finally hung up, the apartment was dark. She didn't turn on the lights. She walked to the piano and sat in the twilight. She placed her hands on the keys, not to play, but to feel the connection. Her mother's hands had done this. Her mother's heart had translated joy and sorrow into this language of black and white keys. And somehow, by some twist of genetics or soul or sheer, unexplainable magic, that language had been passed down. It had lain dormant in her, a silent seed, until the right combination of loneliness, rain, and a forgotten, waiting instrument had made it bloom. She wasn't possessed. She wasn't crazy. She was inherited. A deep, quiet sob rose in her throat, and she let it out. It was grief for a woman she would never know. It was relief for a mystery solved. And it was the terrifying, exhilarating excitement of discovering that you are much, much more than you ever believed you were. The hidden talent hadn't blown everyone away yet, but it had just blown her own life wide open. The secret, once shared with her grandmother, became a living thing inside her. It wasn't a scary ghost anymore. It was a quiet companion. Elena began to play not out of terrified compulsion, but with a sense of purpose. It was a conversation with the mother she never knew. She would sit at the old piano after long days at the hospital, her hands aching from clinical work, and let them speak a different language. She learned the names of the chords from a library book, fitting theory to the feeling in her fingers. She still didn't play recognizable songs. She played moods. A slow, rainy day melody that felt like her mother's sadness. A burst of frantic, joyful notes that might have been her laugh. The piano itself seemed to respond. The tone grew richer as the old wood and strings were exercised. A few of the sticky keys loosened up with use. It was no longer a neglected object. It was being loved back to life. Her building was an old brick walk-up that held a mix of students, young families, and a few retirees who had been there forever. Every summer, the manager organized a picnic in the central courtyard. It was a potluck affair, with folding tables, a grill smoking in the corner, and kids chasing each other round the worn stone fountain. Elena went, more out of a sense of neighborly duty than excitement, bringing a store-bought pasta salad. It was a hot, sticky afternoon that suddenly turned. The sky, which had been a clear blue, darkened in a matter of minutes. A low rumble of thunder rolled across the city, and then the rain came. It didn't drizzle. It fell in a solid, drenching sheet. The picnic dissolved into cheerful chaos. Everyone grabbed plates, tablecloths, coolers, and made a mad dash for the covered archways that lined the courtyard. 40 people were now crammed under the narrow awnings, laughing, shaking water from their hair, watching the rain pour down in curtains. The excitement of the escape quickly faded into a damp, crowded stillness. The party energy was washing away with the rain. Mr. Henderson, a retired man who lived directly below Elena and had complained good-naturedly about her footsteps, was leaning against a pillar. He had a loud, booming voice that carried over the drumming rain. "Well, this is a fine mess," he boomed, smiling. "We need some entertainment. Someone tell a joke, sing a song." A few people chuckled, but no one volunteered. The rain seemed to dampen everyone's spirit. Then, Mr. Henderson's eyes lit up. He peered through the crowd, spotting Elena where she stood by a potted fern. "Elena," he shouted, pointing a finger. "Your window's right there. You've got that big old piano. Give us a concert. Let's have some proper music with this rain." All eyes turned to her. She felt her face grow instantly hot. Her stomach dropped like a stone. "Oh, no, I couldn't," she said, her voice barely a squeak. "I don't really play. Not like that nonsense." Mr. Henderson insisted, the crowd now picking up on the idea. "We hear it sometimes, drifting down. Pretty sounds. Come on, save us from boredom." A chorus of encouragement rose from the damp huddle. "Yeah, give it a try. We don't care if it's good. Play something." Elena's heart was hammering against her ribs. This was her private thing, her secret conversation. The idea of performing it, of letting all these people hear the raw, unpolished voice of this inherited talent, was terrifying. She looked at their faces expectant, hopeful, just looking for a way to pass the time. She looked at the rain, which showed no sign of letting up. She thought of her mother, who had played for packed concert halls. Maybe it wasn't about being perfect. Maybe it was just about sharing the sound. With a shaky nod, she turned and fumbled with her keys. Unlocking the door that led from the courtyard into the ground floor hallway, she took the stairs two at a time, her mind racing. What would she even play? She didn't know any songs. She burst into her apartment. The piano waited, solid and calm. She pushed the window wide open, the sound of the rain becoming a roar in the room. She didn't move the bench. She just sat down, facing the courtyard below. She could see the tops of their heads, a sea of people huddled together, looking up at her window. Her hands were cold and trembling. She laid them on the keys, closing her eyes for a second. She didn't think of the people. She thought of the rain on the warehouse skylight. She thought of the first note. She thought of a woman with wild hair and sad eyes, her fingers pressed down. The first chord was low and resonant, a deep sound that seemed to roll out of the window and mingle with the thunder. It was the sound of the storm itself. She held it, letting it fade, and then began a slow, repeating pattern with her left hand, a steady, heartbeat rhythm that was the pulse of the afternoon. Then her right hand began to speak. It was the melancholy, classical-inspired melody that often came to her when she was tired. It wove around the rhythm, sometimes matching it, sometimes dancing away. It was beautiful and lonely. It was the sound of waiting. The courtyard had gone utterly silent. Not a cough, not a whisper. The only sounds were the rain and the music pouring from the second-floor window. People stopped shifting their weight. They stopped smiling. They just listened. A young mother holding a toddler stilled the child's fidgeting, her gaze fixed upward. Mr. Henderson's joking smile had melted away, replaced by an expression of stunned wonder. Elena didn't see them. She was gone. The music shifted. The storm outside was reaching its peak, and her playing responded. The chords became darker, more dramatic. The melody climbed higher, faster, a frantic dance against the driving left hand. It was the chaos of discovery, the fear of that first night. It was loud and imperfect, and a few notes clashed. But the emotion behind it was so raw and true that the imperfections just made it more human. And then, as the rain began to slacken from a pour to a patter, her music softened. The storm inside her was passing too. The melody returned, slower now, transformed. It was no longer just lonely. It was resolved. It was the understanding after the call with her grandmother. It was the warmth of a connection found. The final notes she played were simple, clear, and sweet, a gentle cascade that faded into the quiet like the last drops of rain from a leaf. She lifted her hands. For a long moment, there was nothing, just the soft patter of the ending storm. Then the sound from the courtyard wasn't applause at first. It was a collective release of breath, a murmur of oh, and wow. Then, Mr. Henderson, his voice thick with an emotion he hadn't expected, started clapping. Not a polite clap, but a strong, solid, steady beat. Everyone joined in. It wasn't wild cheering. It was deeper than that. It was a wave of gratitude and awe that washed up from the courtyard to her open window. People were wiping their eyes. Someone whistled. They were all looking at her, their faces soft with amazement. Elena, suddenly back in her body, felt a wave of heat flood her cheeks. She gave a small, awkward wave from the window and quickly stepped back, sitting heavily on the bench. She could still hear them clapping, could hear voices exclaiming, "That was incredible. I had no idea. What was that piece?" She looked at her hands. They had done that. Her and her mother, through the old, waiting piano. They had taken a rainy afternoon and filled it with something real. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt exposed, vulnerable, like she'd just shown everyone her beating heart. But under the vulnerability, there was a tiny, glowing ember of pride. The hidden talent wasn't hidden anymore. It had stepped into the light, just for a moment, and had blown away a courtyard full of people who were just hoping for a ditty to pass the time. They had gotten a piece of a soul instead, and as the sun finally broke through the clouds, sending a bright shaft of light into her now quiet apartment, Elena knew nothing would ever be quite the same. The courtyard performance didn't make Elena famous, but it changed the air around her. In the days that followed, neighbors she'd only ever nodded to would stop her in the hallway. "That was really something the other day," they'd say, their smiles genuine and warm. Mr. Henderson from downstairs started leaving little notes under her door, not complaints, but things like, "Heard a bit of Beethoven-esque beauty drifting down this evening, lovely." The attention was kind, but it also felt heavy. Her secret was no longer just hers and her grandmother's. It belonged to the building now. The video was the thing that tipped the scale. A neighbor's visiting cousin, standing at the back of the rain-drenched crowd, had filmed the last 90 seconds on her phone. She'd posted it online with the caption, "Unexpected courtyard concert in the rain." This neighbor is amazing. It wasn't a viral sensation, but it did what these things do. It traveled. A friend of a friend shared it, and someone at the local community college saw it, and eventually, it landed in the inbox of a man who listened with a different kind of ear. A week after the picnic, Elena came home to find a proper letter mixed in with the bills. The envelope was thick, the address typed. The return label said City Conservatory of Music. Her hands went cold. She opened it carefully. It was from the head of the piano department. He wrote that a colleague had shared the video, and while the clip was short and the audio quality poor, something in it had compelled him to watch it several times. He spoke not about perfect technique, but about a rare and innate musicality and emotional communication that cannot be taught. He ended by saying he would be honored if she would consider visiting him at the conservatory for an informal chat. Elena stared at the letter for a long time. The conservatory was a fortress of serious talent, a place for people who had been playing since they were 4. She was a nursing student who had found a piano in a junk pile. The gap between those worlds seemed like a canyon. She almost threw the letter away. This was her private thing. Turning it into something formal felt like a betrayal of the quiet, raw truth of it. But then she thought of her mother, Isabel, who had trained in places just like that. She thought of the old man in the warehouse, who had made her promise to play it. A thing like this. It's not meant for silence. Maybe a talent like this wasn't meant for silence either. With her heart in her throat, she wrote back and agreed to meet him. The conservatory building was old and imposing, all stone arches and echoing hallways. From behind closed doors, she heard the sound of scales flying at impossible speeds. Fragments of concertos, the disciplined struggle of mastery. She felt like an imposter in her clean, simple clothes. Her hands that were more accustomed to bedpans and blood pressure cuffs than this rarefied air. The professor, however, was not imposing. He was an older man with kind eyes and large, gentle hands. His office was cluttered with sheet music and books. He didn't make her play for him right away. He just talked. He asked her about the piano, about when she started. Sheepishly, she told him the truth: the warehouse, the rain, the strange knowing in her hands. She told him about her mother, her voice barely a whisper. He listened, nodding slowly. "May I hear you?" he finally asked, gesturing to a beautiful grand piano in the corner of his office. This was different from the courtyard. This was a test. Her mouth went dry. She sat at the grand, its surface gleaming under the light. It felt alien, almost too responsive. For a moment, she panicked. Then she closed her eyes and did the only thing she could. She went back to the beginning. She played the first simple, rainy night pattern. Then she let it go where it wanted, just as she did in her living room. She played the storm and the calm after. She played 5 minutes of her heart, with all its clumsy beauty. When she finished, the room was quiet. The professor leaned back in his chair, a hand over his mouth. He looked moved. "You have a gift," he said plainly. "It is untrained. It is, in technical terms, a beautiful mess. But the core of it, the musical soul of it, is extraordinary. It is like hearing someone speak a language fluently who has never seen its grammar book." He offered to mentor her. Not as a full-time student. He understood her path was set with nursing, but on the side. An hour a week. He said he wouldn't try to overwrite what she had. He would just give her the tools to understand it, to control it, to speak that language with more vocabulary. "You owe it to that gift," he said softly, "to see what it can become." She walked out of there in a daze. She said yes. Life now split into 2 parallel tracks, like the left and right hands of a piece of music. Her days were still about biology, chemistry, and the quiet courage of patience. Her hands learned to give injections, to adjust IVs, to offer comfort with a touch. But her nights, and 1 precious hour a week in a practice room at the conservatory, were about something else entirely. She learned scales and arpeggios, which were frustrating and felt like homework. But then her teacher showed her how the chords she'd been instinctively grabbing had names: D minor, G7, and how they fit together. He gave her simple pieces to learn, not to copy, but to see how other composers built emotion. It was hard work. It was humbling. Sometimes she wanted to quit, to go back to just playing her feelings in the dark. But then, she would sit at her old piano at home, and something new would happen. She would feel a storm of emotion. But now her hands had more colors to paint with. The sadness could be deeper, the joy brighter. The old piano sang under her fingers, richer than ever. Her teacher, after a few months, gently suggested she might play for a few people. "Not a concert," he said, "just sharing." In a room. He arranged for her to play at a small, free music night at a local arts center. The audience would be maybe 30 people, mostly friends of other performers. The night arrived. Sitting backstage, listening to a jazz trio finish their set, Elena's nerves were a live wire. This was a choice. The courtyard had been an accident. This was walking onto a stage. She was wearing a simple black dress, and her palms were slick with sweat. They called her name. She walked out to the small upright piano on stage. The lights were bright, making the audience a shadowy blur. For a terrifying second, her mind went blank. Then she found the familiar, scarred wood of her own piano in her mind's eye. She imagined the rain. She imagined her grandmother's kitchen. She imagined a woman with wild hair smiling. Her hands found the keys. She didn't play a famous sonata. She played her story. She began with the simple, searching notes of discovery. She wove in the storm of fear and the deep, grounding chords of the truth she'd learned from her grandmother. She used a little of the technique she'd learned, a cleaner run here, a more deliberate dynamic shift there, but the heart of it was the same raw, honest voice. She ended with a new melody, one that was not sad, not scared, but full of a quiet, wondering peace. It was the sound of two lives, mother and daughter, harmonizing across time. The silence when she finished was complete, but only for a heartbeat. Then the room filled with sound, not just applause, but a warmth that felt like an embrace. People stood. Their faces, now visible as her eyes adjusted, were wet with tears. Afterwards, an older woman came up to her, gripping her hand. "You took me somewhere," she said, her voice cracking. "Thank you." Elena walked home that night under a clear, starry sky. She didn't feel like a concert pianist. She didn't feel like a star. She felt whole. The two tracks of her life, the healer and the musician, didn't feel at war anymore. They were both about listening, about connecting, about offering something to ease the quiet aches of being human. Back in her apartment, she ran her hand over the top of her old, neglected piano. The scratches were still there. The chipped leg hadn't healed, but it gleamed with care. It was no longer waiting. It was speaking, and so was she. She had blown everyone away, starting with herself. And she understood now that the hidden talent was never just about playing the piano. It was about finding the courage to listen to the quiet, waiting song inside yourself, and having the heart to let it out into the world. The gift, she realized, wasn't the music itself. The gift was the key that had unlocked her, and she would spend the rest of her life learning what doors it could open.